Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mindshare Partners Expert Interview Series. In these interviews, we highlight leaders, researchers, and other change makers furthering the national movement for workforce mental health. In this episode, I'm so excited to speak with and introduce to you Dr. Connie Noonan Hadley. Connie is an organizational psychologist and the founder of the Institute for Life at Work, as well as a research associate professor at the Boston University Questrom School of Business. Connie recently co-authored a piece in Harvard Business Review titled, "We're Still Lonely at Work." Many Americans are feeling lonelier more than ever, and this feeling of disconnect has real impacts in the workplace. Today, we'll dive into some of Connie's insights alongside some tangible actions and takeaways. With that, hello, Connie. Glad to have you with us. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I love the chance to talk about this topic to hopefully help more people.
Perfect. So tell us a bit about what it's like to be lonely at work and how do you define it as a researcher?
We define it as a distressful experience of that is what you've subjectively experienced while working is not at your expectations in terms of interactions and relationships with others. And so it's kind of a long-winded definition, but I want to break it down to some of the key points. The first one is this notion of distress. So loneliness is it's not just being alone. It's not just feeling isolated. It has to have some kind of painful emotional reaction within you as in response to that experience. The second thing is that it is subjective. It's completely subjective, really. So I can't tell you that you're lonely. You can't tell me that I'm lonely. And this, by the way, becomes an issue when we measure it in workplaces because often managers want us to just like get out a lonely detector and try to figure
Mm.
out from the outside who's lonely, who's not. And you can't do that. It's up to you to decide that. And then the final thing is that really this is a gap measure. And that's important. And by gap, I mean it's what your expectations are and then what you experience. And if there's a gap there that's below, that's where loneliness, excuse me, can come in.
Definitely. So I love that breakdown. It's subjective distress and then that disconnect between your desire and experience. So, with that definition, what are some of the key trends you're seeing around loneliness in the workplace?
Well, I'll hit you with some statistics. One of them is from a study that I did with Mark Mortensen. Actually, we collected data right before the pandemic in fall 2019. And we studied just a sample of global executives who work on teams. And we asked them, like, how easy is it for you to connect with your teammates and feel those relationships? And 76% of them reported that they did have difficulty with that, which is really shocking to us because we've studied teams for a long time and we sort of think of them as this wonderful little community that people belong to. But the way we're designing teams these days can often undermine that fabric of connection.
So, now that we know the what, kind of the landscape of loneliness at work, what are some of the main reasons for why workers are experiencing loneliness at work?
Well, as I mentioned, this is still a newish field. It's really only been studied in earnest for the last 20 years or so. So there's a lot that we don't know fully. And one of them is exactly the different types of factors and what weight they play in what we're seeing right now. But I will say, based on what I know and from studying loneliness outside of the work environment as well, there are lots of factors that are big macro factors like societal trends. People will raise the question about introduction of social media, like that could be another big factor that
Mm.
has infiltrated the workplace. It's political changes. It's also demographic shifts in the composition of our workforce. It's things like being able to be more mobile and spread apart. So, for example, in that study I mentioned with the global executives, they were often on teams with people from around the world. And so you can imagine the more that's our technology's made that possible, it's again, it's not like the old days where we all sat in the same place together. So these are big factors that can make a difference in terms of the trends for loneliness. But what I'm a social psychologist, and so what I really want to study is the actual local environment for the people and the way they interact with each other. And so that's where Sarah, my recent research, was really examining the work environment and the culture that people are experiencing and the types of social opportunities that their companies provide to them. So there's a lot of work to be done on those factors, and I can explain a little bit more about those later.
Definitely. So I'm hearing is it's big and complicated, and it depends on kind of, as you said, your locality. So I think with that complexity comes with a lot of myths. And in your latest HBR article, We're So Lonely at Work, you do cover several myths about loneliness at work. So what would you say are some of the top 2 or 3 myths you cover?
Sure. The first one is that it's all because of remote work. So as I just explained, there are lots of factors that are driving these trends. Remote work I didn't put on that list, not because it isn't potentially an important factor, but I think what's happened is that we started to blame it unfairly and maybe too extensively. We actually parsed out like how many days people worked in the office compared to their loneliness levels. And you can see that there is an uptick, a statistical difference for those who are 5 days remote, never in the office. But then when you start looking at only 2 days in the office or 3 or 4 days in the office versus 5 days in the office, it's all the same. So people are not needing 5 days in the office to overcome their loneliness or frankly to maintain their lack of loneliness. Something besides remote work is at play here. So really when we talk about the myth of remote work, we're trying to emphasize that it can be a factor, but it should not be blamed as the 100% determinant of someone's loneliness, or conversely, office is not the solution. So that's one myth. The second myth is that we've heard from some executives that they view this as a really individual problem, and that it's about a certain person, certain type of person really, who is lonely at work. And it's usually something along the lines of there are these young Gen Z millennial types who just are so needy, or these are just the people who are really introverted and they don't know how to socially interact, or maybe they're the people who are just super socially awkward. And I think that's so incredibly unfair. Our data, as well as other data, show that this is a widespread cross-sectional phenomenon. People of all walks of life, all levels of the organization, all types of demographic backgrounds, personalities can be lonely. And so we need to get away from this myth of the like composite of what a lonely worker is.
So with that idea, then, what are some of the best ways we can go about reducing that loneliness at work?
Well, we do have some tips there and in a separate report that we wrote. But some of the highlights are one, I just got to emphasize you should measure it. So, it's not hard to measure, but it's just rarely done. Like Sarah and I developed a 5 question little survey. It's free to anybody. You can implement it. And that's important because again, you'll be surprised. You'll discover that you have your own myths about like which group is lonely in your office once you start measuring it. So get a handle on it. Now you want to do this in a very safe way. So don't go around like asking people with a microphone, are you lonely or not? Because you're not going to get real answers. This is still a very stigmatized experience. And that's part of the reason it causes distress, is you feel you're the only one not connecting. So do it in some anonymous or outside facilitated kind of way. And then the second thing I would say is, take a look at your workflows. Like from that kind of diagnostic tool, in addition to just getting a benchmark on like what the numbers are, you just want to ask some open-ended questions, and then you'll start to understand the blockers. So it might be pace, it might be the amount of time people have. And so then take a look and see if you can design some slack into your workflow. Another one is changing how the culture values connection. And leaders do need to lead the way in this. We hear from a lot of people in our study that their manager was running around like crazy and couldn't socialize with anybody. So why would the manager be enabling them to socialize? So again, you have to kind of walk the talk on this too, if you want to change what the value system in the culture is. And then finally, build in some social activities. I just collected more data last week that just validated this sense of there's a sense of a rhythm that the best companies get into in terms of the social opportunities they offer. It doesn't have to be an overly complicated set of things. People in our study preferred like a free lunch on a regular basis, free lunch, meeting chit chat, and throw in a couple like of after hour get-togethers, whether it's a happy hour or something not focused on alcohol. You can do lots of different things. It doesn't have to be that complicated, but it should be regular. It should be put into the cadence of the work so people can start to plan around it and expect it. That will help get everybody involved because, of course, we have other lives to live too, and you can't make every single event. And also think about how you can do it in an inclusive, collaborative way with your employees. So pick stuff they actually want to do, and then make sure you've reached out to the people that are particularly most vulnerable. So maybe you do have some full-time remote employees. Like, how can you include them in this? So it is putting in place like an architecture of social opportunity. And then there are other things you can do too, like carving out social spaces in your office and things like that. That could be helpful as well. But really at the beginning, I would say just figure out what's going on and start experimenting with a few well-designed social opportunities.
Perfect. So measure it, really be intentional about it, model it, and also let it be organic. Do the things that your people want to do. So with that, that concludes our time together. Thank you so much, Connie, for sharing your insights and perspectives. We'll include links to Connie and her work in the comments or description section below. Thank you all for watching, and thank you, of course, Connie, for your work and for your expertise.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.